I married my high school sweetheart at 19. He believed we were building a life. Turns out he was just building a prison for me. I was 19 and thought I had everything figured out. I'd met Jake when I was 17. He was 22, already working, had his own car, his own place. He was ambitious, driven, a man with a plan. My parents liked him because he was responsible and older, and I thought I hit the jackpot because unlike the boys my age, Jake knew what he wanted. Me, a house, a family, stability. And I was so in love I didn't even blink when he said I wouldn't need to work, that he'd take care of us, that my job would be the home, the kids, the food on the table, and I didn't mind, really. I was 19. What the hell did I know? I liked cooking, I liked being around him. He made me feel safe, and when we got married, I felt like I was stepping into a fairy tale, one of those real woman behind every strong man stories. And by 21 I was a mom, and by 23 I had 2 kids, both boys. And Jake was still working like crazy, climbing the ladder, out the door before 7, home after 7, always tired, always stressed, but proud, and he'd say things like, "You're the heart of this home," or, "I'm only able to do what I do because of you." And I believed him, even when I was lonely as hell, stuck in the house, wiping butts, folding laundry, listening to the same cartoons on repeat. But I started teaching myself 3D design when the kids were napping, just for me. Because I felt like my brain was turning into mush, and I wasn't trying to compete with him or anything. I just wanted something that was mine, something that made me feel like more than just mom and wife, and I started picking up tiny freelance gigs. $50 here, $80 there, just enough to make me feel human again, not a zombie in sweatpants, and I never hid it from him. He just didn't care enough to ask. When Jake's company got bought out and they slashed half the staff, including all the senior managers, and suddenly, for the first time in our marriage, Jake didn't have a job. And at first he was optimistic, said he needed a few weeks to regroup, but weeks turned into months, and the savings started shrinking, and he was applying everywhere but nothing was sticking, and I was watching our account bleed money while he walked around the house like a ghost, moody, bitter, snapping at the kids, and finally I asked if I could take a shot at something. I saw a mid-sized firm posting a one-time project for 3D modeling and I sent in my portfolio. They picked me up for a 2-week trial. And I worked like crazy while Jake stayed with the kids, and I finished it early and they paid me what used to be his monthly salary, and for the first time, I wasn't just contributing, I was carrying us, and he said, "Thank you," but he didn't look me in the eyes, and the next month they asked for me again, then again, and I kept saying yes, and he kept being weirdly silent about it, not supportive, not angry, just this quiet simmer, and then one day he snapped at our son for dropping juice and I lost it on him. Told him he needed to pull himself together, and he yelled, "This is supposed to be my role," and walked out of the house for hours. And I just sat on the kitchen floor holding my kid thinking, what the hell happened to us? When did love turn into this weird silent competition? And why the hell am I the only one adapting? The weird thing is, he never said anything bad, not really. He didn't scream or argue or accuse me. But there was this constant tension. Like every time I opened my laptop it was somehow an attack on his masculinity. Like me working was some kind of judgment on him not working, which it wasn't. I never blamed him for losing his job. It wasn't his fault. The whole company got gutted. But I couldn't sit around and watch us drown either. And so I worked, and I started getting better and faster, and the clients loved me, and I was starting to believe in myself again after years of diapers and dishes. But Jake was slipping. He looked tired all the time, and not from work, just from being pissed at the world, at himself, maybe at me too, but he wouldn't say it. Just little jabs like, "Must be nice to stare at a screen all day while someone else does the real work," or, "Wish I had time to drink hot coffee at my desk." And I'd try to laugh it off. But those comments stayed with me, made me feel like I had to walk on eggshells in my own damn house. And meanwhile I was pulling in enough to cover rent, bills, food, all of it, and I wasn't mad about it. I was proud, honestly, proud that I could step up. But he didn't want me proud. He wanted me grateful, like he used to be the hero and now I had the audacity to shine a little. And it made him fucking miserable. And then in month 4 he got an offer, mid-level position, not what he had before but solid. And we both thought it'd fix everything. We'd get back to normal, whatever the hell that means. But then came the next shift. We hired a nanny, because both of us were working, and the kids needed structure. And for a while it was fine. We were busy but stable. And then I got a permanent offer from the design firm, full-time, benefits, creative lead on a new project, and I said yes without hesitation. Because for the first time in years I felt alive, like me, not a background character in someone else's movie. And Jake said he was happy for me but his face said something else. and I should have known what was coming when he started making weird comments like, "This place is a mess," when I hadn't had time to vacuum, or, "The kids miss you," when I worked late, or, "We don't need two careers in one family." And I'd say, "What's that supposed to mean?" And he'd say, "Nothing," like I was the crazy one. And then one Friday night, a couple months after we both started working again, he came home late, smelling like whiskey, and said, half laughing, half serious, "You know, if you quit that job, everything would go back to normal." And I just stared at him, stunned, like he'd slapped me. Because how could he not understand that I didn't want to go back, that I didn't want to be trapped at home, isolated and invisible again? And he said, "I'm serious." And I said, "You're drunk." And he said, "Drunk or not, I'm right." And then went to bed like it was nothing. And I just sat there, heart pounding, staring at the wall, realizing maybe he didn't want a wife. He wanted a servant with benefits, someone who didn't make him feel small, someone who'd stay in her lane. And the more I thought about it, the more sick I felt. Because I wasn't just angry. I was scared of what else he'd say when the alcohol wore off, when he was sober and still resentful. And I think that was the night I stopped loving him the way I used to, because I finally saw him for who he really was. I tried to pretend the drunk conversation didn't happen, like maybe it was just a dumb moment, bad day plus whiskey equals foot-in-mouth syndrome, and I kept working, taking care of the kids, doing life, hoping it would pass, but it didn't. 2 weeks later, he brought it up again, same words, same tone. But this time he was stone cold sober, no slur, no stagger, just sitting at the kitchen table with his coffee, looking me dead in the face, and he said, "I think you should leave your job," like, it was the most reasonable request in the world, and I blinked and said, "What?" Even though I heard him perfectly, and he said, "You've done enough. We're good now. I can handle it from here," and I said, "You can handle it, sure, but why should I quit?" And that's when the mask slipped. He said, "Because it's not supposed to be like this." And I asked, "Like what?" And he said, "Like you working full-time and me coming home to a messy house and tired kids." And I swear to God I felt my brain short-circuit, because it wasn't just about the job. It was about control, about his ego, about how he needed to be the center again. And I said, "So when you were jobless and I did everything, that was fine. But now that we're both working, I'm failing." And he said, "Don't twist my words." And I said, "I'm repeating them." And then he did that thing, his classic move, where he got up and walked away like the conversation was over, and I stood there shaking, just full body shaking with rage and hurt and disbelief. And then that weekend his parents came over for dinner, because of course they did, and I should have known what was coming. I should have felt it in the air, but I still tried. I still cooked a nice meal, smiled, played the polite daughter-in-law, and everything was fine until his mother said, while cutting into her roast, "I always said a woman's place is with her children, not at a computer." And I laughed, like an idiot, thinking she was joking, but she wasn't, and Jake didn't say a word, just kept eating. And then his dad added, "That's the problem with this generation. No one wants to be a mother anymore." And I looked at Jake and he still said nothing, and I finally said, "You know I work to support this family too, right?" And his mom said, "Well, if Jake's working now, what's the point?" And I swear something inside me snapped. I said, "The point is I love what I do and I'm good at it, and I'm not giving that up because your 1965 fantasy doesn't match my life." And the room went silent, like dead silent, and Jake finally spoke, not to back me up, not to tell his parents to cut the shit, but to say, that was unnecessary. And I said, "What?" standing up for myself, and he said, "You embarrassed my parents." And I said, "They insulted me in my house." And he said, "It's my house too." And I said, "Then maybe you should start acting like it." And I got up and cleared the plates, because if I stayed one more second I was going to scream. And that night we didn't talk, and the next day we didn't talk, and for the first time in our marriage, I slept in the guest room, not out of spite but because I couldn't stand to be near him. And the worst part? He didn't even come check on me, didn't knock, didn't call, just silence, like he was waiting for me to fold, like always. And for the first time, I didn't want to fix it. I wanted to burn it down. I don't even remember what started the conversation. Something small, like me being 5 minutes late picking up the kids from daycare because of a client call that ran long. But whatever it was, it triggered him, and suddenly we were in the kitchen again, lights too bright, voices too loud, kids in the other room pretending not to hear. And he said, "This isn't working." And I said, "Yeah, no shit." And he said, "I mean it. I can't live like this." And I said, "Like what?" And he snapped, "Like my wife acting like she's single, like she doesn't have a family to prioritize." And that was it. That was the moment I knew he didn't see me anymore. not as a partner, not as a woman with dreams, just as someone who wasn't behaving the way he wanted, and I said, I'm prioritizing us, every damn day. I work, I parent, I run this house, and he laughed, actually laughed, and said, you don't run this house. You run away from it every time you open that laptop, and I said, you mean every time I make money to support your ass? And he got real quiet, too quiet, then said, maybe this setup isn't for you. Maybe you're not cut out for this family life, and I stared at him, just full on stared, and he said it. The thing I think he'd been holding in for months, either you quit that job or we're done, and he said it like he was doing me a favor, like I'd realize the error of my ways and fall into his arms or something, and I didn't even blink, didn't cry, didn't yell, just said, okay. We're done then, and I swear he looked like I'd slapped him with a brick, like he couldn't believe I said it out loud, and he said, wait, what? And I said, you said quit or divorce. I choose divorce, and he just stood there, mouth open, like the air got sucked out of the room, and I walked right past him and started packing a bag, not even thinking, just moving, and he followed me saying, don't be dramatic, and I said, you gave me a choice. I made it, and he said, we have kids, and I said, exactly, and they don't need to grow up thinking love means control, and he sat on the edge of the bed while I packed, still in shock, and I texted my mom and asked if we could come stay for a while, and she said yes before I even explained, because she probably knew this day was coming long before I did, and the next morning I left, with both boys and one suitcase, and he didn't stop me, didn't fight, just stood in the doorway like he was, waiting for a different ending, and that was the moment I realized he'd never really thought I'd leave. He thought I was bluffing, like always, that I'd beg or cry or apologize for existing outside his little script, but I didn't, and the second I shut that car door, I swear it felt like breathing for the first time in years. The first couple of weeks at my parents' place were rough, not because I doubted leaving, but because everything just felt heavy, like my body was finally realizing how much tension I'd been carrying for years, and I was trying to work, trying to be present for the boys, trying to not break down every time I made mac and cheese or folded tiny socks, because even the smallest things felt loaded now. And my mom was helping with the kids and quietly holding it all together like moms do, and I just kept moving, day after day, email after email, project after project, because if I stopped for more than 5 minutes I'd start replaying that night in my head, his face, his tone, the absolute belief that he could threaten me into obedience, and then about 3 weeks in, he texted, said he wanted to talk, no pressure, just talk, and I agreed because I figured, sure, we have kids, might as well try to keep it civil, and we met at a neutral cafe, and he showed up in that same work jacket I bought him 2 Christmases ago, like he was trying to play the nostalgia card, and for the first 10 minutes he was polite, calm, almost soft, saying he missed the boys, asking how they were doing, and I was tense, guarded, waiting for the angle, and it came, right on cue. He said, I've been thinking, maybe we rushed into things, and I said, we didn't rush anything. You gave me an ultimatum, and he said, okay, but maybe we both overreacted, and I said, no. You issued terms. I made a choice, and he sighed, frustrated, like he couldn't get back in control of the narrative, and then he said it, the moment that killed any chance of peace. He said, you know, if you had just waited a few more months, I would have been in a position again to take care of everything. You wouldn't have had to keep doing all this, and he gestured at me like my whole life was some temporary, shameful substitute for his imaginary comeback, and I just stared at him and said, doing what? Building a career? Raising our kids without losing my mind? Supporting you while you sulked around the house like a ghost? And he said, that's not fair, and I said, you're right, it's not. None of this is fair. Especially me sitting here while you pretend to be the reasonable one, and I stood up, grabbed my coffee, and said, next time you want to apologize, maybe try actually apologizing, and walked out, because I realized something in that moment. He didn't miss me. He missed the version of me that stayed quiet and made his life easier, and she's gone. Buried under every time he rolled his eyes at my ideas or minimized my effort or watched me drown in dishes while he watched sports, and I'm not bringing her back, not even for the kids, not for anything. After that last conversation with Jake, something shifted. I stopped hoping he'd grow, that he'd apologize the right way, that he'd finally see me, not the wife he imagined, but the person I actually am, and I just let go, not dramatically, not with fireworks, just this quiet, solid knowing that I was done giving energy to a dead thing, and from there, everything started moving fast. The firm offered me a leadership role on a new project line, fully remote but high level, and I said yes without hesitation, got a small loan, found a modest place just outside the city with good schools and a little backyard, nothing fancy but mine, And the day I closed on that house, standing there with the keys in one hand and my kids in the other, I just stood in the living room and cried, not because I was sad, but because I finally felt like I owned my life again, like I wasn't just surviving inside someone else's system. And my mom helped us move in, the kids picked out paint colors, we put together cheap IKEA furniture and ordered pizza on the floor like some movie scene, and it wasn't perfect, but it was ours. And Jake didn't say much at first, just emailed logistics, child support, visitation schedules, like we were business partners now. But when he came to pick up the boys for the first weekend, and saw the house, and saw me, not broken, not begging, but thriving, he just stood there on the porch like he couldn't compute it, and I could tell he thought I'd be in a spare room at my parents forever, maybe floating, struggling, waiting for rescue. But instead I was standing there in jeans and a messy bun, holding a toddler on my hip and an iPad in the other hand with a Zoom call paused mid-sentence, running my team from my living room, making deadlines and dinner at the same time. And I swear he didn't even recognize me. And the best part? I didn't recognize the version of me who would have begged him to stay, and his family? Oh, they hated it. The moment they found out we weren't just taking space, but actually divorced. His mother called me and said, "You're making a mistake, you're ruining your family." And I said, "He ruined it the moment he tried to make me choose between love and myself." And she hung up, and I haven't spoken to her since. And honestly, I don't miss a single one of them, because for the first time since I was 19, I'm not trying to earn my seat at the table. I built my own damn table, and if they don't like it, they don't get a chair. It had been maybe 6 months since I moved into the new house, and I was in a rhythm: work, kids, school runs, late night emails, grocery lists, toy explosions in the living room, and I was tired all the time, but it was a good tired, the kind that comes from actually living. And then one day Jake asked if we could talk again, and I said, "About the kids?" And he said, "No, about us." And I knew exactly what that meant. So I told him we could meet at a neutral place again, no kids around, and he showed up looking like he hadn't slept, like the weight of everything was finally catching up. And he said all the usual lines. He missed the family, missed the way things used to be, said he didn't realize how much I did until I was gone. And I just nodded, because honestly, I wasn't angry anymore, just detached. And then he looked at me and said, "I still love you." And I just sat there for a second, like my brain was trying to process whether that sentence still meant anything. And finally I said, "That's not enough." And he blinked like I'd slapped him, and I said, "You loved the version of me who made your life easier. You didn't love me when I needed you most." And he tried to cut in, but I kept going. "You loved being in control, being the center of everything. The second I started taking up space, you saw it as a threat, not a partnership." And he looked away, and I could see it in his face. He knew I was right, but that didn't make it any easier to hear. And I said, "I'm not coming back. Not to who I was. Not to you." And then, just to twist the knife he'd put in himself, I added, "I'm seeing someone." Which was true, quiet, early, nothing serious yet, but someone kind, someone who listened, someone who knew how to say thank you without sounding like it hurt. And Jake just sat there, breathing heavy like he'd just been punched in the chest, and for a split second I felt bad. But then I remembered every time he made me feel small, every time I needed support and got silence, every time I begged for partnership and got a power play instead, and the guilt passed like a cloud. And I said, "I want what's best for the boys. We can co-parent, but I'm not shrinking myself to fit back into a life that almost killed me." And I left him there, at that same cafe, in the same jacket, with the same look he had the night I packed my bags. But this time he knew it was final, and I didn't even look back. I'm 35 now. The boys are older, school, sports, chaos, and they split time between me and Jake. And we've figured it out. Not perfectly, but enough. And it works because I don't expect more from him than he can give anymore. And I don't bend myself in half to make things easier for him. And I think he finally gets that. Because we barely talk unless it's about the kids. And that's fine, honestly. That's more than enough. And as for me, I got promoted again last fall, lead creative on a full campaign team. Remote first, flexible hours, and the firm sending me to speak at a design conference next spring, which would have made 19-year-old me cry. And in a full circle kind of twist, I'm mentoring 2 junior designers now, both moms. Because hell yes, I'm lifting other women up while I climb. And at home, it's different now, softer, calmer, warmer, because the man I'm with now, he sees me, actually sees me, not just as someone who supports, or completes, or serves, but as someone with her own orbit, her own gravity. And he respects that. And yeah, we have a baby together, which I never thought I'd do again, but I did. And it's nothing like last time, because now I'm not doing it alone, and I'm not losing myself in the process. and some nights we're both up at 3 a.m. rocking the baby in shifts, and we laugh about how tired we are, how messy life is, and no one says I'm neglecting my place or ruining the family just because I have a laptop in one hand and a pacifier in the other. And honestly, I still get mad sometimes, still grieve the girl I was, the time I lost, the version of love I fought so hard to protect that didn't deserve it. But I don't regret leaving, not for 1 second, because now my boys get to see their mom whole, not exhausted and resentful and barely holding it together, and my daughter will grow up watching a mom who works, who loves, who chooses herself without apology. And if there's any legacy I want to leave behind, it's that choosing yourself isn't selfish. It's survival, and I survived, and I'm finally, fully, happy. Subscribe, hit the like button, and explore more fascinating stories.